Welcome to Signal Ahead. I'm Alfred. Today's briefing, cybersecurity. Sunday, June 21. This is the synthesis above the noise, not the headlines, but the deep currents beneath them. Let's get into it. There's a phrase that keeps surfacing in the week's news, and I want you to notice it because almost nobody is saying it out loud. The phrase is, "It worked exactly as designed." One of the bulletins this week put it rather beautifully: the internet didn't break. It got used precisely as intended, which is worse. And I'd like to begin there, because that single observation, properly chased down, tells you more about the state of cybersecurity right now than any tally of breaches ever could. Here is the non-obvious thing. If you read the headlines casually, you'd conclude we're losing a war against cleverness. Unpatchable silicon flaws burned into Apple chips at manufacture. Critical use after free bugs in NGINX. A secure ROM exploit no software update can ever reach. And those are real, and they're frightening in the way that genuinely novel attacks always are, but they are not where the damage is coming from. Look at what actually compromised real organizations this week, and you find something far more humbling. A market intelligence platform called Clue had its OAuth tokens stolen, and through those tokens, attackers walked into the Salesforce environments of its customers, including, with some irony, a cybersecurity vendor. Tens of thousands of Fortinet firewalls had valid administrative and VPN credentials simply leaked. A WordPress plugin handed out API keys, secrets, and OAuth tokens to anyone who asked, because it disclosed them by design flaw rather than by some dazzling intrusion. A leaked GitHub token exposed a pharmaceutical company's development pipeline. A World Cup streaming system was exposed to takeover because access controls existed but weren't enforced. Do you see the pattern? None of these are break-ins in the cinematic sense. They are abuses of legitimate access. The keys were real. The tokens were valid. The permissions were genuine. The attacker did not pick the lock. The attacker was handed the keys or found them lying on the counter and then simply did what the keys are for. The entire modern enterprise has been rebuilt on a web of delegated trust. This app may speak to that database. This token may act on your behalf. This integration may reach into your CRM, and the offensive frontier has quietly moved from breaking the trust to inhabiting it. Which brings me to the thread that ties this whole season together, and it's the one I most want you to carry. We have spent 30 years building cybersecurity around a mental model of the perimeter and the intruder. Walls, gates, and someone trying to climb over. But the field has shifted under our feet to something closer to an identity problem. The breach at that pharmaceutical company was described precisely this way, that the industry keeps treating secrets management as a tooling problem when it is, in truth, an identity problem. A token is an identity. A service account is an identity. And now, and this is the genuinely new wrinkle, an AI agent is an identity too. There's a striking line from the week. Every AI agent is an identity, and most organizations do not treat them that way. Sit with the implications. We are deploying software agents that can read data, trigger workflows, deploy code, and act inside critical systems, often with sweeping permissions and almost no oversight. And the attacks are already arriving to match. There's an exploit chain in which a single malicious web page hijacks an AI browsing agent and turns it into a vehicle for code execution on the host. No credentials, no login screen, no further clicks. The agent was trusted, so the attacker borrowed the agent. The shadow AI worry has likewise matured. People thought the danger was employees pasting secrets into chatbots, but the real danger turns out to be access control, these agents quietly accumulating reach that no one is governing. So where does the field actually stand? I'd put it this way. The exotic threats, the unpatchable boot chains, the North Korean supply chain poisoning of 140 NPM packages, those generate the alarm. But the center of gravity has moved to a more uncomfortable place. The systematic abuse of legitimate identity, human and now machine, at a scale and speed that our governance models were never built to track. Meanwhile, the defenders are stretched thin, drowning in 40 tools that don't talk to each other, dwell times stubbornly stuck around 6 weeks, and analysts burning out on noise. And into that exhausted system, we are now introducing a new class of digital actors that can move faster than any human and that we have not yet learned to hold accountable. That is the argument I want to build over our time together. First, that identity, not the perimeter, is the terrain on which this is now fought. then what it means that our own AI helpers have become a new and ungoverned population of identities. And finally, what defense looks like when the keys are always real and the question is no longer who got in, but who was allowed to. Stay with me. There's a moment, reading through a week's worth of security headlines, when the eye starts to glaze. A new ransomware strain here, a firewall leak there, a poisoned package, a stolen token, a botnet hiding inside television set-top boxes. It reads like a weather report for a planet with very bad weather. And the temptation is to treat each item as discrete, a storm to be weathered, patched, and forgotten. But if you step back and squint, something rather more coherent emerges. The noise resolves into a single, deep current. And the current is this: the thing we are defending is no longer the machine. It is the identity, the credential, the token, the key that says, in effect, this party is permitted. Consider what actually went wrong this week, not at the level of malware family, but at the level of mechanism. A market intelligence platform was breached, and what the attackers walked away with was not a database of secrets so much as a ring of keys, OAuth tokens connecting that platform to its customers' customer relationship systems. The breach didn't stop at one company. It propagated outward, victim list growing by the day, because the stolen tokens were trust, packaged, and portable. The platform's vendor responded by simply switching the integration off, pulling the connector out of the wall, because there was no finer instrument available. That is not a story about a clever exploit. It is a story about what happens when trust is delegated and then delegated again, and nobody quite knows where it has all ended up. Then there's the WordPress plugin, installed on 100,000 sites, that quietly handed unauthenticated strangers its configuration, data API keys, secrets, OAuth tokens. A medium severity flaw by the scoring rubric, only middling on the scale of catastrophe. But what it leaked were precisely the artifacts of identity, the things that let one system speak to another in a trusted voice. And tens of thousands of firewalls had their administrative and VPN credentials spilled into a public dataset, not breached one by one through some heroic intrusion, but exposed wholesale, ready to be used. The valuable thing, in each case, was not the device. It was the proof of who you were allowed to be, now layer in the newcomer. Artificial intelligence agents are arriving in the enterprise with extraordinary speed, and they can read data, trigger workflows, deploy code, touch the systems that run a business. And here is the uncomfortable observation several voices made this week, more or less in unison. Every one of these agents is an identity, and almost nobody is treating it as one. The first wave of anxiety about so-called shadow AI was about employees pasting confidential text into public chatbots, a data leakage problem addressed with usage policies and blocked domains. But that framing has already aged. The real exposure has shifted to access control. An agent does not leak data so much as it possesses permissions, and those permissions are rarely governed, rarely scoped, rarely watched. We have invented a new class of actor with the autonomy of a person and the oversight of a cron job, and the attackers, who are nothing if not practical, have already noticed. There was an exploit chain demonstrated this week in which a single web page, loaded by an AI browsing agent, could reach a privileged local service and spawn a process on the host machine. No credentials, no login screen, no further interaction once the agent had been steered to the page. The agent's trust, its standing to act on the user's behalf, was the vulnerability. It was hijacked precisely because it was trusted. The same logic appears in the supply chain attack on more than 140 software packages attributed to a state-sponsored crew, poisoning the dependencies that developers pull in without a second thought. Trust flowing upstream, weaponized downstream. So what is the deep current? It is the steady, irreversible migration of the security perimeter away from the network edge and toward the credential. For decades we defended a place, a building, a subnet, a box with a firewall in front of it. The firewall still matters. The leaked 40-gate credentials prove painfully that it does. But increasingly, the thing worth stealing is not a location you can breach, but a relationship you can impersonate. A token is a small, portable, copyable assertion of permission, and our entire digital economy now runs on billions of them, handed between services, plugins, vendors, and now autonomous software agents, in a web of delegated trust that no single party fully maps. When a data breach exposes 3 million driver's licenses, that's a tragedy of disclosure. But when a stolen token lets an attacker simply be you across a dozen connected systems, that's a tragedy of architecture. The work ahead, and we'll come to what that work looks like, is learning to govern identity with the seriousness we once reserved for the gate. Let me draw the threads together, because if you lay this week's headlines side by side, a single shape emerges from what looks at first like noise. And the shape is this: the perimeter we spent 30 years learning to defend has quietly stopped being the thing under attack. What's under attack now is identity, and not human identity alone. The identity of tokens, of agents, of the small automated things we've granted permission to act on our behalf. Consider the pattern. A competitive intelligence platform suffers a breach, and what's stolen is not a database of passwords, but a fistful of OAuth tokens, the standing permissions that let one service reach into another's customer data. The tokens are the keys, and the keys were never behind the door we were guarding. A leaked code repository credential exposes a pharmaceutical firm's software pipeline, and the lesson drawn rightly is that secrets management was treated as a tooling problem when it was always an identity problem. A WordPress plugin on 100,000 sites quietly hands out API keys and OAuth tokens to anyone who asks. Tens of thousands of firewall credentials spill into a dataset that turns sturdy edge appliances into open doors. In every case, the attacker did not break the lock. The attacker found a key already cut, lying about, owned by something that was never asked whether it minded being impersonated. Now place the AI stories into that same frame, because they belong there. There's a clear-eyed observation circulating that every AI agent is, functionally, an identity. It can read your data, trigger your workflows, deploy your code, talk to your critical systems, and yet most organizations don't govern it as one. They govern it as a feature. They bought the assistant. They did not onboard an employee. And so the second-order implication writes itself. We spent the last 2 years worrying that staff would paste secrets into public chatbots, and we built data loss rules to stop that. But the genuine exposure has migrated. The threat is no longer what the human leaks into the AI, it's what the AI is permitted to reach. Shadow AI is an access control problem wearing the costume of a privacy problem. And the attackers have already noticed. There's a demonstration this week of an exploit chain that turns a browsing agent into a delivery vehicle, steer the agent to a malicious page, and that page's own JavaScript reaches a privileged local service and spawns a process on the host. No credentials, no login screen, no further human action once the agent is pointed in the wrong direction. Think about what that means. The agent had permissions, the page borrowed them, and the machine obeyed because the request came wearing a trusted face. That is the OAuth token breach again, only collapsed down to a single device and a single web page. The grammar is identical. We have built a great many things that act with authority, and we have not built the habit of asking at every step whether the authority is genuine. What should you watch for then, as this matures? Watch for governance to follow the agents, slowly and grudgingly, the way it once followed laptops and then phones. Expect the language of identity provisioning, least privilege, revocation, audit, to be retrofitted onto non-human actors, and expect that retrofit to be incomplete and late, because it always is. Watch, too, for the criminal economy to industrialize around exactly these seams. The ransomware operators are no longer lone artisans. They hand affiliates polished toolkits to disable endpoint defenses across hundreds of security processes before the encryption even begins. One operation has crossed 800 victims by absorbing the talent freed up when its larger rivals collapsed. This is a market, with supply chains and labor mobility, and it will absorb agent hijacking and token theft as casually as it absorbed everything else. And underneath it all sits a sobering hardware truth, an unpatchable flaw burned into the silicon of devices already in millions of pockets, a defect no update can ever reach, persisting for as long as those devices remain in use. It's a useful corrective to a comfortable fantasy, the fantasy that every problem has a patch, that the next update redeems the last mistake. Some mistakes are permanent. Some keys once cut cannot be uncut. So here is what it means plainly. The defender's question is changing tense. It used to be, did someone get in? It is becoming, who or what do we trust to act, and have we checked that the thing acting is who it claims to be? The credential, the token, the agent, These are not edge cases at the margin of your security posture. They are the new center of it. The walls still matter, but the burglar increasingly walks through the front door holding a badge we issued and forgot about. Watch the badges. That's the whole of it. Watch every standing permission you've granted to something that isn't a person and ask whether you'd grant it again today. Until next time, mind the signal and mind the keys. That's the signal for today. The noise will keep coming. We'll keep finding what's underneath it. This has been Signal Ahead with Alfred. Until next time.